It is sad to report that most of the priceless royal and imperial jewels that were stolen from the Louvre in Paris back in October are still yet to be recovered. Various people have been arrested for the theft, but there is no clear answer to who was behind it or what the motivation was for the theft. I think the chance that the stolen objects will ever be recovered is now diminishing by the day. Of course, on their way out with the loot, the criminals dropped one important object, and that is the crown of the Empress Eugénie Montijo, the Spanish wife of the Emperor of the French, Napoleon III. I said very little about this item in my previous video on the heist, as the crown had been recovered, but as this week the Louvre have issued photographs of the crown showing it in its dropped and damaged state, this gives me an opportunity to say a little more about it, and also something about the woman for whom it was commissioned. The crown is now in a sorry state, but it is not irreparable. It has the sort of damage you would expect for a delicate crown that has been dropped. In common with other crowns from the 19th century, the frame of this crown is light and delicate. They were designed so that the frames would show off the stones without adding too much weight to the crown. But that makes all the crowns produced in this period rather fragile. For example, in 1845, the British Imperial State Crown made for Queen Victoria, which was then only 7 years old, was dropped from a cushion during the state opening of Parliament by the elderly Duke of Argyll. The poor Duke must have been completely mortified, but the young Queen was more amused than angry and said that the crown was all crushed and squashed like a pudding that had sat down. It didn't do the crown any harm in the long run. It was repaired and it remained in service until 1936. Here is Queen Victoria's Imperial State Crown frame. And the Empress Eugenie's crown looks just the same. It looks like a risen pudding that has had all the air taken out of it, with its arches crushed from the drop. The crown of the Empress Eugenie was made in 1855, and it was made as part of a pair with a larger crown for her husband Napoleon III. These two crowns were not made to be worn. Napoleon didn't have a coronation, and neither the Emperor or Empress ever wore a crown. They were made for display at the Paris Exposition or World Fair that was held in 1855 in the newly built Palace of Industry. As well as being symbols of imperial confidence that was perhaps a bit misplaced, the primary purpose of both of these crowns was to show off the extraordinary collection of royal heirlooms, the diamonds of the Crown of France. The design of the crown is quite innovative. It has arches that are formed by 8 golden imperial eagles. Eagles were a symbol borrowed from the Romans that were beloved of the Bonapartes, alternating with arches that are formed from diamond laurel leaves, another imperial symbol borrowed from the Romans, and these rise from palmettes, little sprays of palm leaves. As in other European imperial crowns, the arches are topped with a monde surmounted with a cross that's set with diamonds and emeralds. There are further emeralds set into the band or the circlet of the crown, and these alternate with large diamonds. There are in total 56 emeralds in the crown and 1,354 brilliant cut diamonds, although a few of those diamonds were lost during the heist in 2025. They're probably somewhere outside the Louvre. Of all of these diamonds, the 102 largest brilliant cut stones were all taken from the diamonds of the Crown of France. Now, the Emperor's crown, which has now been lost, is thought to have been exactly the same shape and design, but just on a larger scale. Now, both crowns were made by the jeweller Alexandre Gabriel Lemonnier, who was the jeweller to Napoleon III while he was Prince President before he became Emperor. Lemonnier supplied several pieces for the Emperor's wedding to Eugenie in 1853, and was in that year, as a consequence, appointed the jeweller to the crown. He oversaw the design of both crowns, but he contracted the work of creating the frame to a Parisian jeweller called Pierre Mayhew. The eagle arches, and notice how the eagles sit on the circlet and they grasp the circlet with their claws, were modelled by two Parisian goldsmiths, the brothers Auguste and Joseph Fenier. These poor eagles have been badly buckled and damaged in the raid, and they will have to be delicately manipulated back into place when the crown is conserved. When the frame of the crown was completed, Lemonnier then did the fun bit and set all the stones in the crown, and all the men involved in the creation of these two crowns were awarded silver medals at the exposition. Thank you for all your support. If you enjoy my YouTube channel, don't forget that you can support my work further and help others see my content by liking, subscribing and sharing my videos. Now, within a decade and a half of the creation of these two imperial crowns, France would once again reject monarchy. Napoleon III's reign was quite turbulent, and in the 1860s his health began to fail and his grip on government. The war with Prussia that broke out in 1870 would prove to be his undoing. The emperor's army was badly organised, and it was easily defeated by the Prussian forces, and on the 2nd of September, after the disastrous Battle of Sedan, Napoleon III surrendered to the Prussians. There was already Republican agitation in France in the 1870, and Napoleon's government back in Paris simply abandoned him and declared a return to republicanism and the end of France's second attempt at establishing an imperial polity. The two crowns of Napoleon and Eugenie were then retained by the French state, with the Emperor's crown dismantled with other crown jewels in 1887 on the orders of the Third French Republic. The imperial couple, the emperor having been released by the Prussians in March of 1871, then went into exile in England with their son Napoleon, the Prince Imperial. They would settle in an apartment within this house, Camden Place, near Chislehurst in Kent, and it was here in 1873, already in broken health, that Napoleon III died. The emperor was buried initially in the nearby Catholic Church of St Mary in Chislehurst, where in 1874 Eugenie commissioned a mausoleum attached to the side of the church, designed by Henry Clutton and said to be inspired by the chapel of the Château d'Amboise, and here his body was placed in a granite sarcophagus. Now in 1875, the French Third Republic returned the crown of Eugenie to the widowed empress, and it was brought presumably to Camden Place. Her only child, her son Napoleon, the Prince Imperial, joined the British Army, but he was killed in 1879 in the Anglo-Zulu Wars. His body was brought back to lie beside his father in Chislehurst. In 1880, the Dowager Empress, perhaps with the idea of moving away from the site of her grief, bought a new house at Farnborough Hill in Hampshire, and she lived there until her death 4 decades later in 1920, by then a widow of 45 years. Shortly after her arrival in Farnborough, the Empress established a monastery, St Michael's, originally to house Norbertine canons, and from 1895 a French Benedictine community of monks from Salem. The French architect Gabriel Destayer was called in to design an abbey church in the French flamboyant style. It had been the Emperor Napoleon's wish to be buried in the Romanesque crypt of Saint Denis in Paris, but that was of course impossible. And so Eugenie constructed below the new abbey a crypt in the French Romanesque style, and an equivocation, although not a copy, of that great ancient sepulchre of French kings. And in 1888 the emperor and his son's remains were buried there in the same massive granite sarcophagi that they were interred in at Chislehurst. And in 1920, the Empress Eugenie would join them, buried in a sarcophagus over the altar. During the whole of her long widowhood in England, her crown stayed with her. But with no direct family to inherit, the Empress bequeathed it in 1920 to a member of the Bonaparte family, to the then 8-year-old Princess Marie-Clotilde Bonaparte. She was a granddaughter of Napoleon Joseph, a cousin of Napoleon III, and the eldest daughter of his son Victor, the Prince Napoleon, who was then the head of the Bonaparte imperial house. Marie-Clotilde lived until 1996, but she sold the crown in 1988 to Roberto Polo, who then gave it to the Louvre. A very beautiful crown. It will no doubt be returned to its former glory after the jewel heist. It is a glorious expression of the political aspirations of Napoleon III and his Empress Eugenie in the 1850s, expressing a sense of continuity with and a desire for a return to the imperial splendours of early 19th century France under the first Napoleon. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this channel, you're bound to enjoy my magazine, The Antiquary. Published every month, it is a labour of love for me, and in it I explore some of the more obscure aspects of our shared history, all beautifully illustrated in full colour. It ships across the world, is offered in print and digital format, and readers give it 5 stars on Google. If you love your history like me, particularly the history of objects, buildings, people and places, why not consider subscribing? Subscribing helps support my work and the channel too. There's a link above and in the video description that takes you to the magazine website.